Yes, I think it's recorded now.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. So yeah, as I was saying, Australia, in my eyes anyway, is the Drogba's are the pinnacle of a physical team. They also have all the other elements, but when you put the physical side on top of it, it just kind of changes the game really. And so, from a coach's perspective, is that something that you had deliberately tried to focus on, or did you just have that group of players and were able to exploit it?
The 2016 team, it wasn't as important. We did, in terms of the selection process, we didn't focus too much on, I guess, baseline fitness. Coming into the second, 2018 team, we did only because we had more applicants and we were able to.
Okay.
So we did have baseline measures that everybody who was selected had to meet. So we did a beep test, we did an agility test, we did sprinting, we did a plank hold, we did just basic stuff. It wasn't I think we did a standing long jump, I can't remember, but it was just a basic, it kind of meant in the nicest way possible we could shave off the bottom end of our spectrum because we had 200 odd players that were applying and we could obviously only take 21. So it also, we used it to measure improvement. So we told them, we did selections in, I think, December, then again in January. But we said, we've got your recorded marks. We want to see you try and improve those over the next month.
Yep.
And that kind of gave us an idea of the commitment level of the team that we were selecting. Luckily, Australia, sport is a big thing for us, just culturally. So a lot of, I think, pretty much all of our Australian players play other sports or have played other sports prior to coming to Quidditch. Those who haven't definitely, I guess, lag behind. But I think with Quidditch, and as you said, the physicality gave us that next leg up. And that's where we were also able to separate our players out. So it was a component of what we selected. It wasn't entirely why we selected a team that's all 6'5", but it definitely helped because we were able to do that. But I know that a lot of other countries probably aren't in the position to be well, we have 60 players that have everything we need, so we'll take the top 20 that are physically the strongest. I think I went off track a little bit.
No, that's good. And so, aside from the having a team full of 6'5" players, what are the attributes that you look for an elite player? What skills should they be able to do well?
Part of what we were looking for initially was a brooms up sprint, which I think has been taken out. I'm not really sure. I haven't read the new rule book. I know
it's still there. It's just a bit different.
That's fair. My friend broke a nose doing a brooms up sprint, so they're going to change it. That's fine. So that was part of what we wanted. So we wanted a selection of players that we knew were fast, straight off the bat, as soon as they were up, they were going. The next cohort of players we selected were our drivers. So those that may not be quick to start with, but pick up momentum as they move, which bar obviously Callum Mayling, tend to be our bigger players. He, which is still amazes me, was the most agile player on the Australian team, despite being 100 kilos and 6'3".
Yep.
He beat everybody else out in agility, which is crazy.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of the footage, and yeah, he's a marvel to watch.
It's just, yeah, he's amazing. So we picked our sprinters and we picked our momentum drivers. Then we picked our tacklers. So all of our point guards were looked at for their ability to stop someone from moving, essentially. Are they able to stop them and are they able to take them to ground? So we had 2 point guards that were chosen just for that. And then we had obviously a few that we could rotate through. And then what else did we look for? We did quite a bit of sprint training. So Simon Spann, who's at one of our really, really tall male chasers, is an ex-national sprinter. So he did a lot of work with the team in regards to actually form in running and sprinting and what you should be doing to get that speed up. And I think that helped a lot. And then obviously things like core strength to keep yourself safe, upper body strength to increase your throwing range, particularly for our beaters.
Yep.
They also did a lot of hand strength. I don't know how often it gets used in the UK, but the Denny Tasman, like they grab the bludger like this. So they did a lot of stuff around that kind of hold, because it is quite difficult to like actually fold the bludger over and hold it like that.
Yeah, we do see that a lot, especially with beaters with smaller hands, because it kind of reduces the gap between the advantage you get from having the big hands. You can still do everything you need.
Yeah.
Me personally, I'm a chaser, but I've done a bit of beating this in the trainings we've had, and I was shocked at the level of grip strength and forearm strength you need to just be constantly getting those.
Yeah, and not lose the bludger to somebody else and stuff.
Yeah.
And a big part of what we did, so we did the structure of how we train, because Australia is huge, obviously. We selected our team, and then we had 4 weekends between January and June, that 4 or 5, maybe 5, that we all met up, and for the full 2 days we trained. And part of every single weekend was contact. So if we were doing sort of strength stuff, it was in relation to contact. So we did I classify different types of tackles. So we'd work through our 3 different types of tackles. And then the strength was an adjunct to make sure that people were staying safe. So it was also like injury prevention was a lot of our strength focus, because it is contact.
How did you classify the 3 different tackles?
So we had just stopping them, and that's any way that works best for you, depending on your size and their size. And then we had where, I can't remember what I call them. This is a long time ago now. I have to think back. Where you put your knee almost between their knees and wrap them from the hips and bring them down, which is using your force to take them down. And then our third one was using their momentum to take them down, which is really scary the first few times you do it. But someone like Mailing and someone like James Williams are really good at this, in that they let the person run past them and they almost just lie down, and the person's own momentum tends to carry them over. So we did a lot of that, which is really scary to do. I hated doing it in training because I did it with like my own team. But essentially, yeah, you just hug the hip and just lie down, and they just come with you because they're moving so fast. So it's really good if it's someone like Mailing, who's big and heavy and fast. If you can at least slow him by making him stumble or stopping his stride. Then we also did like 2-man tackles. So one to stop and one to either strip the ball if you're not as confident, or to take them to ground.
Yeah, and I find that with the momentum tackle, the third one you mentioned, it's really useful as well for players that maybe don't have that much physical size or mass to them, because they can just use the other person's momentum. There's a player, Vanessa Go, who I've seen quite a lot. And she's absolutely fantastic at that. And I would wager she's maybe 5'3". But the players that she's taken down are almost twice the size.
In that sweet spot, and they're already running. It's too late. Like you've just tipped their center of gravity too far.
Yeah.
So that was kind of, we did a lot of tackling, but even beaters. And I know that a lot of people sort of go, beaters don't need to know how to tackle, but ours did.
Yeah. And that's the advantage you get. And then, so in the camps that you did, how much time would you allot to the fitness side of things, and how much to the tactical drills? I think that what I'm trying to get at is how much emphasis should the players have to work on fitness in their own time versus how much should be taken up out of the club's training?
So the first session we did was probably a little bit more strength heavy because again, my background's in gymnastics, so I'm absolutely a perfectionist. I wanted to ensure that if they are doing it in their own time, they're doing it correctly. So we just kind of went over form and what drills you can do and what's the best thing to do and where you should focus and that kind of stuff. We had a lot of I drew from a lot of players. So Callum Mailing, really great on like strength training and like weights. Someone like Damo is really, really good at, again, strength training in more of a martial arts sense. So that was a different perspective. We had Simon Spann, who did all the sprinting stuff. Taya Rawson, also an ex-athlete. So she did a lot of sprinting work with the team as well.
Okay.
But outside of that, generally, it was in your own time. So it was an expectation on our Australian team that they would be spending, I had recommended 3 days a week where they were doing their own strength training based on what they wanted to work on. And if they needed ideas or they needed a bit more of a focus, then they came to me and I would sort of give them a vague, I guess, like program, but not super detailed. Just like, you need to do this for this and this for this and this for this. And then once that's good, come back and we'll make it harder.
And I suppose you'll be able to check up on them because you already have their baseline scores and then you can see the post-test as well.
Yeah, exactly. So we didn't do too much of that, but it was also like, if I saw at a camp, like, or your knees are looking really unstable, I need you to go away in the next month before I see you again and do strength training, particularly look at ACL activities, because I don't want you to hurt yourself. That was also part of it too. In club level, it's a little bit different. I used to play for the Willows, where we had our first season and won everything because we had 6 drop bears and me.
Oh, nice.
But we did at the end of our training. So we ran to start and we stretched and then we trained. And then for the last 20 to 30 minutes, we did strength training.
Oh, okay.
Which is probably more applicable at a club level because most of our players needed it and it's more casual. I guess for Team Australia, we only had those weekends.
Yep.
So with that time, I wanted to work on our cohesion and like the team dynamics, because they only get 8 days before we were in Italy.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I suppose you have the benefit of being a gymnastics coach so that you can really target what you want the players to work on.
Yeah. Many, many years of coaching gymnastics.
And then, so that leads me on to my next question. What would you say are so Quidditch comes from so many different sports and there are so many transferable skills. Do you have any sports that you look at or you see players coming in from different backgrounds and think, oh yeah, this X sport or Y sport is even more beneficial than just a general sporting background?
I reckon our AFL, our Aussie rules, is absolutely, like, a lot of our female Quidditch players who ended up on Team Australia have now transitioned to AFL from playing
really?
Quidditch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, some of them had played before, but quite a number ended up, moving over to play AFL and especially if they're going to bring in 2 arm tackles, it's very similar in terms of the level of contact. It's run on a much bigger pitch, so fitness-wise, it is a bit different. But just sort of a lot of the principles are quite the same, and same with rugby. Very similar contact-wise. Ball handling-wise, for our female players on Team Australia, almost all of them had played netball, which I know is a pretty Australian sport.
It's quite big in the UK as well. Maybe not the US,
Okay.
but in the UK, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good one. We used a lot of netball drills for passing for our chasers, because a bar, you can't move when you catch a netball, but just their ball handling skills are quite similar. Particularly many years ago when I first started playing Quidditch, we kind of drew from netball more than basketball because it just made more sense. And then a lot of AFL drills for tackling because, tackling was a big one in Australia. When they first started, New South Wales didn't play tackle Quidditch, they played no contact. And then Victoria was like, nah, stuff that. We're gonna tackle everybody. And pretty much since 2014, our national cup's been in Victoria. So I think tackling makes a big difference.
Yeah. And then so from the tackling perspective, what tips would you have for developing players? So what we find in the UK is quite a lot of people aren't very confident in tackling. I think a lot of it comes down to knowledge, but then there is also the inherent fear factor. So do you have any tips for developing players that are looking to improve their competency?
Yeah, I think outside of just having to do it, I think my best asset when I was coaching the Aussie team was that I could teach people how to fall safely, because in gymnastics, you fall over a lot. That's part of gymnastics. If you do gym, you're going to fall down. So just taking them through things like knowing how to tuck your head in and knowing not to throw your arms out when you're falling, and dispersing your weight between your hip and your shoulder. We did a lot of work on like side rolls and back rolls and head tucked in and tucking your arms in if you're going to fall, because you're better off to land on your shoulder than you are to land on an outstretched hand. And again, Damo, really, really good for that with a martial arts background. So in the 2016 team, he ended up taking a lot of that falling information, because it's so important in martial arts as well, that if you're going to go down, you're going to go down without hurting yourself. So we did a lot of fall safety, and then we did a lot of really slow, like, this is where you position your head, and this is where you position your arms, and this is where you want to do your feet. So things like, and like when you talk about it, it seems really obvious, but if you're looking at the person you're tackling, looking at where their feet are and hitting them on the opposite plane. So if their feet are like here, trying to go through the middle, because that's where they can't step and can't fix their balance.
Yep.
And a lot of people who haven't played sport before don't really think about that. They just go, I'm just going to hit them and hope they go down. Instead of going, physics says if I hit them at, forwards, they've got their back foot to save them. But if I hit them from the side, they're going to go down a lot easier. So a lot of that kind of stuff, and a lot of, the momentum tackle was a bit of a game changer for us, for a lot of people that weren't as confident. And I can preach to that because I don't play in contact sports. I'm a dancer and a gymnast. But
gymnastics
just practicing.
Like a pretty contact sport. My only experience is watching cheer on Netflix, but it seems pretty brutal.
I think it's brutal in different ways. It's like, it's brutal, but it's because you've made a mistake, or like you've misjudged. Like, I've seen some disgusting falls off balance beams and bars, to be fair. Kids are fine, but it is very scary. But it is just practice and knowing, like, when I started doing tackles, I started with someone who was smaller than me, and then someone who was a similar size, and then someone who was bigger than me. So just, I guess, biting the bullet and knowing that you're going to be safe. And just practicing and like soft grass, obviously not on AstroTurf or anything, because that's going to hurt.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for the coach to be very reassuring for people that are not as confident with tackling. And I know one of my teammates is Nathan Morden, and he is amazing. He was my beta partner. So he was always like, I know it's scary, but I can guarantee that you're not going to hurt yourself. So we're just going to do it, and we're going to do it slow, and this is what you need to do. And I think that helped me from a coach's perspective, because I was like, okay, cool. Like, it's just a matter of going. You're not going to get hurt. The worst that's going to happen is they might land on you a little bit, but you'll be fine. You're on the grass. And just sort of really like fostering and letting them watch other people do it too, that if you've got people that are a little bit more unsure, like I usually sit at the back of the line because I don't like tackling. But then I could watch everybody else cycle through first and go, okay, cool. Well, I know that they put their head here, and I know that they did this, and I know that they did that, and they were fine. So if I do it too, I too am going to be fine. It is just a fear factor, particularly as you get older. Because I've worked with kids and older kids in gymnastics. They sort of hit 14, and that's when you start being scared of things. Before that, it's like, oh, I might hurt myself, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. And
then you become a teenager and you hit puberty, and I think your brain kind of rewires into more of a survival safety perspective.
Yeah.
So I guess working over those pathways of like, I'm going to hurt myself, I'm going to hurt myself, I'm going to hurt myself, to like, I'm going to be okay. But I do a lot of work with young coaches, but it's like, I always use this analogy. It's like walking in the snow, and the first time you do it, it's just footprints, but the more you walk the path, the easier it gets to see it. So the more you practice something, the easier your brain goes straight to that. So they've conditioned themselves to be scared. So that path is really well worn. So they need to make a new path, and the first 20 times they do it, it's still going to be scary. But the more you walk it, the more you erase the other one of the fear. So I guess that's, yeah, I do a lot of work like that with with staff.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Yeah, I agree. I think it comes down to confidence and having more information and practicing. And if you can make yourself a bit more robust with strength training, that I think that will not only will help the physical aspect, but that will increase the confidence that you have.
Yeah, and that confidence in falling over and still being okay. And like, I think also as adults, we tend, and even like late teenagers, like high uni students, we tend to forget what it feels like to learn something new.
Yeah.
Because it's been a long time since you've really had to push yourself. But I often tell people, like, remember how scared you were the first time you drove a car, and now you drive your car everywhere and it doesn't matter anymore. And this is the same. The first time you do this, it's going to be scary. And probably the first 10 times you do it, it's going to be scary. But at some point, it's going to stop being scary.
Yeah.
Because you just get used to it.
And then you might even enjoy it.
You might find that you like it. And you might, it won't be, I don't know.
Yeah, and then you turn into a drop bear.
Yeah, and you
and
can
then
play Quidditch.
Yeah. So it's probably the wrong way around asking you as the coach for Australia. But how do you or do you make any tactical changes, or do you have to change the way you play when you face an overtly physical team? You guys
Yes.
being probably the most physical, but if you were in another national coaches team, like, are there any changes that you have to make to adapt to that?
Yeah, we had not, it was different in 2018. So I'll use 2016 as an example, because we came in not really knowing, because the previous World Cup had like 7 teams and all of a sudden we had like 20 teams, and we didn't really know, we're so isolated here. We didn't really know what it was going to be. Like, we were quite nervous about facing the UK if we'd had to face them. And obviously we were nervous about the States. But we had different like offensive and defensive structures, and this stayed with the type of team you were playing. So if they were a driving team, it changed. If they were a highly defensive team, it changed. If they were a tall team, it changed. If they were a team that had really aggressive beaters, it changed. So we kind of had like probably 4 set defenses and probably between 4 and 6 set offenses that at least started what happened. After, you know, they're in your space, things change. But we at least had frameworks to work from depending on what we were doing. And the Willows were the same. So as an example, we implemented, when we started the Willows, a double point defence, which hadn't really been seen a lot in Australia. So usually we had the Baylor, which is obviously your 3 on hoops and your point guard. And then we had your man to man, and then we also had keeper on hoops man to man, so you had 1 loose player. But it hadn't really been done that you had 2 point guards and then 2 on hoops. And this works surprisingly well if you're against a team that tends to drive. We would only do a double point if you have both beaters, or both bludgers, sorry. If you only have 1 bludger, you leave your defense a little bit too open. So we'd only ever do a double point if we had both bludgers in our half. But the benefit of a double point is that often they have their ball carrier and then they have their driver. If they're a team that is big, they have 2 big players. And basically we had 2 options, which was option 1 was 1 point guard watches the ball and the other point guard tags the driver. And then the other 2 players are just left to whoever's on defense because they're not as threatening.
Yep.
Otherwise, if they had 2 really big drivers, both players, regardless of where the ball was, stuck to the drivers. And again, left the beaters and the keeper and the other person on hoops to handle the other 2 chasers and their beaters. And part of that was that you could stop them before they started running. So instead of letting them run the full length of the pitch and barreling through your players, we pushed our point guards quite high, which meant they met them a third of the way down the pitch. So they weren't close enough to be able to run through us. And it also meant that if you stopped them, you had a second point guard to complete a tackle if you needed, or to strip the ball, or to block the pass. So if we were playing bigger teams, generally, and we obviously had bludger control, we'd push a double point defense. If not, we would never do a man defense on a bigger team because it never works. Because somehow you always end up with your least a physical player on their most physical player, and then you have really made a mistake.
Yeah.
So we generally would stick to that Baylor zone if we only had one bludger, because it's kind of a safer option. But we always had, depending on where the ball was, so you've got your point and they're coming down, whoever's on that same side would push across. So if they, again, needed to help with a tackle or if the point got beat out, we had one of our players on the hoops a little bit closer. So we were able to cycle through quicker and not allow them to gain ground.
Mm.
And I think that's really important when you have a highly physical team. You can't let them get near your hoops because, especially if you're playing against Callum Mailing, if he gets within 3 meters of your hoops, he's going to score. He's either going to run through and score or he's going to pop the shot through.
Yeah.
So you have to figure out a way to keep them out of your space. Sometimes we even tagged them with a beater if we knew that our bigger players weren't playing or were off. We knew that one of our beaters had to tag, regardless of where the ball was, had to tag Mailing. Like, that was their job.
Mm.
Your job, if Callum Mailing gets the ball, is to beat him. You do nothing else except for that. Because some days we knew that we had no one that could stop him.
Yeah.
But a bludger can.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask. So how much does the personnel you have on pitch factor into, especially for the 2-2 defense, how you would play that? So would you expect everybody, all of your Quaffle players, to be able to fill in and carry out that
all
role?
of our players could do that, yeah. Even at club level. On drop bears, obviously, it was a little bit different. We fluidly moved through double point defenses and single point defenses, depending on what was going on. But at club level, even I'm a beater and I could play a double point defense. Like, I knew how to do it. And if I had to step in and do it, I could confidently do it because I trained it. So we did a lot of like half pitch. It took a long time to get right. And I think we also had really specific rules on who does what. And we knew before the game, if this player and this player and this player are on, you need to tag that player and that player. And if, so it was always dependent on who the lineup was. Like our Monash Muggles, who won Nationals last year, had 3 really big drivers, but also really aggressive beaters. So we had to balance, were we going to try and stop their drivers or were we going to focus on their beaters?
Sounds like a nightmare situation.
Yeah, and it's hard, but we also ended up being like, well, the Quaffle's easier to stop. So we'll focus on their beaters and trust our chasers to at least keep them out long enough to get rid of the beaters and then turn over the ball. But yeah, it was tricky.
And then, so if that was in the drop bags, you say now you have you had 2 specific point chasers in Damo and I'm not sure the other person.
We had Damo and Kolf and Brandon Frizen that moved through our point guards. Damo we used more often if they were bigger and not as agile, because Damo is bigger and not as agile. If they had speedy but also strong ball carriers and drivers, we'd use more of our Kolf and our Brandon. But all of the players on the Australian team were trained to do everything.
Yeah.
So most of our players knew how to beat, all of our players knew how to chase, all of our players knew how to point guard. And that's something that I maintained, was that you don't need to be able to perform this, but you need to understand how it works. Because as a beater, you need to know how the chasers are moving so you can fit in with that. And same with the chasers, you need to know what the beaters are planning to do, because the better understanding you have of their movements, the better you can use it to your advantage. And I found a lot when watching footage of other teams, and it's all over the board, but the beaters and the chasers don't always work together. Yeah. It's often like the chasers doing something and the beaters responding, or the beaters doing something and the chasers responding, but they're not working at the same time. And I think that was a big asset of the Australian team, was that all of our team knew, at least rudimentally, what the other players were doing.
Yeah. And then so just to that point, so you have players that are just naturally better at a certain thing. Maybe it's point defending, maybe it's hoop defending, maybe it's catching at the hoops. where would you go in terms of that player doubling down and getting even better at that specific thing they're good at, or taking that training time to make sure that they can do everything?
That's a really good question. With our Australian team, I was very lucky in that most of our players are very, very talented.
Yeah.
So I was able to push them really hard. A lot of the time they knew kind of what their primary and secondary key skills were on the pitch, and they just know that that's what they can do. And we improve that a little bit, but there's only so much you can improve when someone's already really good at something.
Yeah.
So it was more about, I'm a big advocate of pushing people out of their comfort zone. So I would often go, okay, in our chaser line, the way that we did it was we had positions 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it's a little bit complicated to explain, and I haven't explained this in a long time, but if you start as a 1, you don't stay as a 1, because as soon as the quaffle moves, your number changes.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think learning to understand each position, and everyone played as a ball carrier. Everyone played as a 2, everyone played as a 3, everyone played as a 4. In most cases, they knew most sat between 2 numbers. So like Callum Mailing would usually be a 1 or a 2 because he's a ball carrier and he's a driver.
Yep.
So he's the person you get the ball to first so he can get it closer to the hoops, and then he'll pass it off. And then our wings are usually our 3s and our 4s. But everyone played every position. So we found that there were certain things that people got better at, and then they were able to add that to their skill set. And there were some things that people just never really got good at, like picks and screens. Sometimes people really understand how they work, and sometimes no matter what you do, it just doesn't click.
Yeah.
So, and because I knew that we had time, I wasn't too concerned with what they could already do. I wanted to see how far I could push them into what they couldn't already do, so we could have a better, well-rounded, more dynamic team.
Okay. Yeah. I think, it's an interesting one because, as you say, or especially for the drop bears, if you're already at such a high level, then you could improve, but probably you wouldn't see the drastic improvement of working on other areas. But then also, if you have someone who's a 10 at tackling, if they become a 12, then no, it's game over basically. So yeah, I think that is quite interesting. And so when you have people who have these specific traits, if you were to put together like your perfect, kind of like a Frankenstein player, you could take a body part from here and another body part from there. Like, as a utility player, what would that player look like? So maybe taking body parts from players that you know.
Okay, this is funny. All right. We're going to go with Callum Mailing's legs because they're amazing. We're going to go with James Williams' tactical awareness and tenacity. I don't know if you've ever seen, he's taken down Mailing multiple times, and Williams is about 5'0".
Okay.
So, we'd have Nathan Morton's throwing arm because I played with him on the Willows, and one training he pegged a bludger at me and it left a bruise about this big. So he throws really hard. It hurts a lot. But he was on my team, so it was fine. And then I would have Taya Rawson's like positioning at hoops and her catching hands, because she's really good. She gets a ball and she's able to put it straight through. And then I would have Caitlin Thomas's ability to set screens, because I will never forget the time that she screened one of the American players at 2016 and he hit the deck, and I've never seen anyone look so confused. It was like a crowd, like he just didn't know what just happened. It was amazing. And then I would have, lastly, and this is again a 2016 player, James Hyder, his like hands, because I've seen the shittest passes go anywhere on the pitch, and somehow he's just like, boink, and he has the ball, and you're like, I didn't even know you were there, let alone like passing the ball that was like a hospital pass to nobody. And then all of a sudden he's got the ball, and you're like, oh, excellent.
Yeah.
We didn't lose the ball. That's my Franken player.
Okay. And then, so one last question, similar to that one. If you could do the same thing, but take aspects from other sports, what kind of background would the perfect player have?
That's really interesting. I think AFL, especially for the Australians, is a big one. I think athletics, like track and field, has been really valuable to a lot of our players for speed. And I think a lot of people that play Quidditch have never been taught how to run properly. So once we taught even our moderately fast players how they should be correctly moving, we saw a huge improvement in their speed as well. I think either gymnastics or martial arts, obviously I'm going to advocate my own sport, but for the perspective of being able to fall safely, like being able to take a hit and not hurt yourself, not, twist an ankle, not bust your knee, not get a concussion, because you've improved your spatial awareness to a point that you know where you are. So even if you're falling, you're going to be able to fall without hurting yourself and without hurting somebody else. And probably like hand-based ball sports, like netball, handball, basketball, just any of those, and just like throwing and catching, because a lot of Quidditch players can't catch. Love them to death. Cannot catch a ball to save themselves.
I think I might be one of them.
Yeah. Play better. I don't have to catch as much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, and honestly, it was like a running joke on the Australian team of me yelling at people to catch with two hands because they kept like dropping the ball, and I was just like, just use both your hands. Oh my God, stop dropping the ball. So that became a running joke of my most said phrase was catch with two hands.
Yeah.
But yes, I think that would be a good combination to have.
Yeah, no, that sounds really good. I think what most people usually think of is they handball, they go rugby, and they go dodgeball. But I think
dodgeball is a good one.
Yeah, I think they're just the fundamentals, because there are so many nuances that you can have to improve in tangible ways beyond that. So yeah, with the AFL and the gymnastics and things like that, that's really interesting.
Gymnastics, I mean, again, it's my sport. I've worked in the sport for a long time, but we've been kind of advocating that it's a basis. Like, you're learning your spatial awareness, you're learning, you're setting that foundation down for strength and how to fall and safety. And so we sort of recommend like do a year of that and then go and do whatever the hell else you want. But just have like swimming, like have that year so you at least have the basics of how to move your body safely. And then you can go and play whatever other sport you want.
Yeah.
And that'll be so much easier because you're already aware of what your body does and how it feels and that kind of stuff.
So actually, I think I have one more question, just based off that. So given the global situation that we're in, if a player is looking to develop and is looking to maybe do some drills or exercises at home or in the absence of the team, do you have any recommendations for that?
I think a big proponent of what people should be doing right now is injury prevention, because people are going to have almost a year of inactivity and are going to think that they're going to go straight back into sport and they're going to hurt themselves. And it's going to be ACLs, it's going to be your ligaments in your ankles, it's going to be broken wrists and broken ankles because people are deconditioned. So I think, and this is part of what we've been doing on Zoom with the gymnastics club, because we run 20 sessions a week on Zoom, is that it's just strength pretty much, and it's just injury prevention. So looking at, and even just like looking at YouTube, like ACL injury prevention and incorporating that into your warm-up, and looking at making sure that all the muscles you're going to need, so break down the skills that you're doing. Like obviously you need to run, so your quads need to be good, your hammies need to be good, your glutes, breaking it down into what you need and why those activities are going to be relevant to you. So I'm going to do push-ups because I need to be able to still throw my bludger without throwing my shoulder out. So that's why I would incorporate push-ups into my activities.
Yep.
And I think everyone should do core because core is always good and it's going to help with everything. And in injury prevention, I think people sometimes get really focused on getting stronger and they should be focusing on their stability. So instead of going, I'm doing strength activities, I'm doing stability activities, I'm doing core stability, and I'm doing knee stability to make sure that those little movements that you do are still protected, not just doing like 50 crunches and 100 push-ups, because at the end of the day, that's not always going to be that helpful.
Yeah, no, definitely. 100% agree. Yeah, I am probably one of the most inflexible people you've ever met. So what I've been trying to do is to work on some daily stretching and mobility routines. And yeah, I can already see the benefits. So hopefully when I incorporate that into sport, I should be a bit better.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of mobility, lots of stability, lots of just like, even without a ball, like moving through the movements, going, okay, what muscles am I using when I do this? And how can I make sure that I'm not going to injure them when I go back? And people like forget to do stuff like that. Like just breaking down, like, what does a tackle look like and what muscles are you using? What does your throwing look like and what muscles are you using? Because that's going to determine really what you should be working on. And then obviously making sure that if you do the left side, you do the right side. If you do the front, you do the back. So if you do your tummy muscles, you have to do your back muscles. If you do your pecs, you have to do your delts as well. Like, just, I think if you haven't done a sport qualification or a personal training qualification or anything like that, people don't think about that kind of stuff. Where it's like, if you over strengthen one muscle, you're going to sacrifice the quality of the antagonist muscle. So just that understanding is always really good.
Yeah, and knowing why you're doing the reason, why you're doing the thing, because there's no point in doing something that's not going to be beneficial to you, or there's no point in not thinking, what's the reason behind me doing this exercise?
Exactly.
So yeah, for the program that I'm putting together, I'm writing a bit of a guide, and what I'm trying to do is break down all of the fundamental movements of Quidditch. So what are the base levels of tackle and the throw and things like that. So hopefully that will be quite useful.
Yeah, I think isolation's been hard. I mean, we've been online with gymnastics since April, so we're now coming on to 6 months of trying to keep 150 kids entertained online. Some of our kids train 6 hours a week on Zoom. So if you need ideas, I have plenty by this point in time. Because our senior competitive kids are, and we've maintained most of them through the entire 6 months of training online, which is crazy because they're literally like in their living room with a yoga mat doing gymnastics. So keeping it interesting.
Well, hopefully we'll be out of this situation. I'm not sure when that will be, but at least Melbourne to get out of quarantine would be good.
It would be good. We can wait. I will be surprised if we can get back into the club this year. But
oh, really?
Yeah, it's where I am, like our municipality has a very high number of cases. So even if they partially start opening stuff up, we're like at the bottom of the